Okay, we keep reading Time Machine magazine. Up to chapter 2. Chapter 2, where is it? Here it is. In her dreams, Rachel kept falling over and over, like tumbling down a mountain, until finally her eyes opened and she was awake. Sweat trickled down her forehead, her breath was caught in her throat, and the sheets were tangled around her legs. Rachel shoved the bed coverings aside and stood up. It was still pitch black outside. According to the clock on her phone, which she'd fumbled for and found on the nightstand beside her bed, the time was 2:47 in the morning. She'd barely spoken a word since the gymnastic meet. Rachel had waited until the competition was over and her entire team had come and gone before slipping out. When she emerged, her family were waiting there for her. Through sniffles and nose blowing from what was soon to be a full-blown cold, Nate tried his hardest to lighten the mood and make her feel better. "Hey, there she is," Nate said with a fake grin. "I was positive all the lost and smelly socks in the locker room came alive and took you hostage." She ignored him. "Can't we just go home?" Rachel asked her mum. "Thought maybe we could all use a large scoop of ice cream," her grandpa said. He wore the same smile as Nate, but he pulled it off with a bit more sincerity. "Not in the celebrating mood, Grandpa Sam." Grandpa Sam chewed his bottom lip and then quietly said, "Maybe next time." Rachel stormed ahead of the others. Nate sidled up next to her. "Come on," he said. "You're really going to pass up on Free Rocky Road?" She didn't respond, afraid that if she did, smoke might come out of her ears and the fire shooting from her mouth would singe her cousin. Nate hung back and let Rachel walk alone. There was no way she was going to let him change her mind or her attitude. Once in the quiet of a darkened room, Rachel felt the opposite of protected. She felt confined, cooped up. Technically, it was her grandpa's old office, converted to a small bedroom with a pull-out bed from an old couch. Rachel and her mum were living back at Grandpa Sam's cabin on Clear Lake for a bit, having just recently moved back to Wells. Rachel stepped out of the room and padded down the hall, avoiding the places where she knew the floor would creak. She could hear Grandpa Sam snoring peacefully and the soft sound of classical music coming from her mum's bedroom. Her mum never slept without music. In the kitchen, Rachel clinked on a small pendant light hanging above the island and sink and pulled a glass from a cupboard and filled it with water. It was as she took her first drink that she thought she heard something. It was a soft whisper, there, and then gone. Or was it even there at all? She strained her ears and listened hard. Nothing. Compelled, Rachel set the glass down on the counter and slipped from the kitchen. She let her feet and heart guide her, though she was certain she knew where they would lead her, which was to the basement. There, her grandpa's collection of prized memorabilia, his museum of sports trinkets from his years as a sports journalist, was showcased in glass cubes and on shelves. She didn't turn on the light as she entered the basement, afraid that she would wake someone or that the magic calling to her would fizzle out in the harsh glow of the overheads. The room was lit only by the faint haze of a nearly full moon. Outside, cast in through the large windows and cloaking the cluttered space with shadow. Rachel didn't need a light, though. A brief crackle of blue energy, like a tiny bolt of lightning, sparked across the room. "The filing cabinet," she whispered, surprised by the loudness of her voice in the silent space. One of Grandpa Sam's most prized possessions was a filing cabinet filled with magazines. A few were loose, their pages ancient and brittle, but most were packaged in plastic bags for protection. Almost all of them were issues of Sports Illustrated. The magazines contained more than articles and photos. They contained magic. At any time, an issue of Sports Illustrated, the right issue, could send Rachel and her cousin back in time. The blue spark of electricity came from atop the cabinet. Rachel wove through the basement to the cabinet to see what adventures awaited her. The cabinet was in mint condition. The magazine, was in mint condition, concealed in a plastic bag with a thin white board behind it to keep it from bending. In the moonlight, Rachel saw the magazine's cover. On it was a photo of a young, smiling girl confidently thrusting both arms into the air. The girl was about Rachel's age, maybe younger. She wore a long-sleeved white leotard, and her brown hair hung evenly across her forehead. She stole the show, the magazine read in bold yellow letters, and below it was a name, Nadia Comaneci. Rachel whispered. She cranked her head and looked around, suspiciously. First left, then right. She fully expected Grandpa Sam to be standing behind her. He was not. As her eyes scanned the basement, she caught a glimpse of a similar photo of the gymnast. This one was in black and white, and was part of a news article. In the blue sliver of moonlight cast along the wall, she read the headline aloud. The Darling of Montreal. Below the headline were the words, by Sam Winstead. She knew the article, knew the headline. Grandpa Sam talked about it often, whenever they sat in the peace and quiet of Clear Lake and enjoyed a leisurely afternoon. That article, he'd tell them, got me a promotion that gave your grandmother and I enough money to buy this place. Best story I ever wrote. Seeing that young lady compete at the Olympics was one of the highlights of my career. Rachel turned her attention back to the Sports Illustrated on the cabinet. As she reached for the magazine, a small jolt of energy pulsed in her fingers. It trailed up her hand, wrist, and arm. She watched the strands of energy and how they connected her to the magazine, but she wasn't worried about unleashing its power, not yet. In order for the Sports Illustrated to send her back in time, she knew she needed to read the cover article, and though she couldn't be sure, Rachel thought she also needed something else to time travel, or rather, someone else. Nate, she said quietly. Above her, the floor creaked. Rachel gasped. Someone else is awake. Abandoning the magazine, she scurried back up the stairs and into the kitchen just before her mum, bleary-eyed and nearly sleepwalking, entered. Hey, her mum said with a scratchy voice. She rubbed her eyes. Saw the light on. Everything okay? Rachel tried to get her heart to stop pounding in her chest. She nodded. Couldn't sleep, she said. Her mum screwed her face up into a look of understanding. Don't worry so much, she said. You're a fantastic gymnast. You'll feel much better in the morning, so try to get some sleep, okay? Okay. Rachel set her empty water glass in the sink and followed her mum out of the kitchen. She clicked the light off after her. As she slipped back under the covers, her mind was no longer on the gymnastics meet. She didn't think she would be dreaming of falling anymore. No, for the rest of the night she would dream of time travelling.